June 26, 1944. Hollandia Air Base in Dutch New Guinea. The game of checkers remained incomplete as Lieutenant Colonel Charles MacDonald lifted his gaze from the game board. The individual at his screen door had just stated his name, but MacDonald had not yet fully processed it. His attention was fixed on the checkers match with Lieutenant Colonel Merrill Smith, the operations officer of Satan's Angels. The civilian calmly repeated his introduction with a measured assurance that made MacDonald stop. Charles Lindbergh, the very Charles Lindbergh, the most celebrated aviator in the United States, was present inside a temporary recreation hall thousands of miles from American soil, requesting to converse about P-38 combat tactics. Neither MacDonald nor Lindbergh realized at that instant that this meeting would fundamentally alter the practice of long-range fighter missions throughout the Pacific theater. Over the forthcoming 6 weeks, Lindbergh would impart methods that nearly added 400 miles to the combat radius of the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, shifting what airmen viewed as unattainable into accepted practice. The account of a civilian advisor who doubled the effective range of America's foremost twin-engine fighter is not just a story about engineering. It also tells of the persistence needed to defeat institutional skepticism, the compelling reality of pilots who came to rely on calculations instead of experience, and how one expert's focus on fuel conservation redirected the history of the air war in the Pacific. The equations behind increased range were not being developed in technical textbooks, but instead through the daily operations of flyers who would soon realize that their previous instruction on engine handling was insufficient. Achieving the impossible was on the verge of becoming habitual, led by a 42-year-old civilian who had first piloted a P-38 just 3 days prior. The journey leading to that doorstep in Hollandia had its roots 17 years prior, above the Atlantic. On May 20 and 21 Stone, 1927, Charles Augustus Lindbergh forever changed flight by traveling 3,600 miles from New York to Paris solo within 33.5 hours. The monoplane he piloted, the Ryan NYP named Spirit of St. Louis, held 450 gallons of fuel stored in tanks so spacious they obstructed the forward view. Lindbergh had relied on a periscope and dead reckoning for navigation, monitoring his fuel consumption with a rigorousness that may have appeared obsessive to his contemporaries. He touched down at Labor Field with 85 gallons remaining, managing fuel efficiency that specialists had deemed impossible for a Wright Whirlwind radial engine. That scrupulous focus on managing fuel resources became the cornerstone of Lindbergh's technical prowess. During the 1930s, while performing survey routes for Pan American Airways above the Atlantic and Pacific, Lindbergh improved procedures that pushed range boundaries well past the factory ratings. He knew that manufacturers' ranges were only averages, not the extremes. Each engine was capable of an ideal set of conditions, balancing power, fuel use, and wear in harmony. Reaching that point meant grasping the connection between manifold pressure, propeller RPM, mixture adjustment, and indicated airspeed in ways that standard lessons failed to explain. By the year 1944, Lindbergh had established himself as one of the leading authorities worldwide on long-distance flight, though his standing with the U.S. military was made complex by his isolationist stance prior to the war. He had ardently campaigned against U.S. entry into European wars, served as head of the America First Committee, and as a result was disliked by President Franklin Roosevelt. On the 29th of April, 1941, after Roosevelt drew a public comparison between him and the Civil War Confederate sympathizer Clement Vallandigham, Lindbergh gave up his commission as colonel in the Air Reserve. When the attack on Pearl Harbor brought the United States into the global conflict, Lindbergh tried to return to service in the Army Air Corps. Roosevelt made sure personally that Lindbergh would not don an American military uniform again for the duration of the war. Nevertheless, expertise finds a path. Without the ability to serve in a military capacity, Lindbergh became a civilian technical advisor for companies building aircraft. He began working for United Aircraft Corporation in 1943 and collaborated closely with their Chance Bod division, which manufactured the F-4U Corsair. He spent a period at Ford's Willow Run facility addressing production difficulties related to the B-24 Liberator. He carried out risky high-altitude test flights in P-47 Thunderbolts to assess engine performance. He played a role in developing dive bombing techniques for the Corsair. His technical input was vast, but Lindbergh still longed for actual combat experience. At the beginning of 1944, he found a possible avenue. United Aircraft expressed an interest in evaluating the practicality of a new twin-engine fighter, and the only American contender of that type was the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. Lindbergh persuaded United Aircraft to dispatch him to the Pacific as their technical observer to monitor P-38 activities in actual combat situations. On the 3rd of April, 1944, Lindbergh got ready for departure to the South Pacific. He stopped at Brooks Brothers in New York City to get a naval officer's outfit with no insignia. At Brentano's bookshop, he acquired a small copy of the New Testament and noted in his journal that day, "Since I can only bring a single and a very small book, that is what I have chosen. I would not have made the same selection 10 years ago, but the more I discover and the more I read, the less it faces rivalry." He departed San Diego on the 24th of April, his destination officially listed as Marine Corps aviation bases in the region of Guadalcanal in the South Pacific. The journey was sanctioned by the Department of the Navy, but it was kept hidden from the White House. Neither President Roosevelt nor Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox had any knowledge that Lindbergh was being sent to the front. Initially assigned to observe, Lindbergh found himself taking on a different role when officers from Marine Corps Aviation asked him to join combat sorties as an observer. On May 21, 1944, Lindbergh participated in his inaugural combat mission, conducting a strafing attack with Marine Fighting Squadron 222 close to the Japanese base at Rabaul. The Marines referred to the mission as observation. Lindbergh, however, flew with his weapons ready, firing at targets whenever the chance arose. He rapidly displayed a level of hands-on skill that surpassed academic knowledge. Collaborating with Corsair pilots, he instructed them on methods to depart safely with bomb payloads twice as heavy as the F-4U's certified maximum. Aircraft losses due to excessive weight were an issue the Marines faced. Through Lindbergh's meticulous study of engine settings, takeoff velocities, and load balance, the frequency of accidents dropped, and strike performance improved. News circulated throughout the Pacific that the renowned flyer was participating in combat as a civilian, and that he was addressing operational challenges that had evaded military pilots for a considerable time. By the middle of June 1944, Lindbergh had become intrigued by the P-38 Lightning. United Aircraft's interest in dual-engine fighters was sincere. At the same time, Lindbergh was informed that the 475th Fighter Group, known as Satan's Angels, was regarded as one of the premier Lightning units in the Pacific. To gain first-hand knowledge of the P-38, that was the destination he chose. On June 15, 1944, Lindbergh secured a ride to Finchen, New Guinea. He made his arrival known at the headquarters of the 5th Air Force in Nadsab, where he had lunch with Colonel Marion Cooper. On the night of Sunday, June 18, Lindbergh enjoyed dinner with General Enos Whitehead, during which they talked about events in New Guinea and Lindbergh's intentions to watch P-38 missions. The authorization remained casual, unofficial, and inadequate by rigorous military protocols. Nevertheless, in the adaptable command hierarchy of the Southwest Pacific area, trust and proven skills frequently outweighed bureaucracy. On June 20, Lindbergh spent 1 hour and 20 minutes becoming familiar with a P-38, flying with the 35th Squadron from the 8th Fighter Group. It marked his first experience piloting the unique twin-boom aircraft. On June 26, he made his way to Hollandia, where he interrupted Lieutenant Colonel MacDonald's game of checkers. At age 29, MacDonald had achieved ace status with 10 victories. He was the commanding officer of the 475th Fighter Group, which formed in Australia on May 14, 1943, and since then, had grown into one of the most accomplished P-38 groups in the theater. The unit's 3 squadrons, the 431st, 432nd, and 433rd operated the newest P-38J versions featuring updated intercoolers and extra fuel storage. These Lightnings were the fighters with the longest range in the Pacific, executing missions beyond the reach of any other planes. However, even using auxiliary fuel tanks, the P-38's effective radius had its boundaries. Missions to remote objectives scarcely left sufficient fuel for combat activity, leading pilots to return with dangerously depleted tanks. A number of planes were lost after being forced off course by adverse weather, resulting in runs that surpassed their fuel limits. At first, McDonald courteously dismissed Lindbergh and resumed playing checkers. When Lindbergh mentioned that General Hutchinson, commander of the 3rd Air Task Force, had sent him to talk about P-38 combat missions, McDonald began to pay heed. Following a short discussion, McDonald inquired if Lindbergh wanted to participate in a mission the following day. Lindbergh accepted the offer. The mission was set to depart at first light. Instead of having Lindbergh return to headquarters, McDonald recommended he remain at the 475th camp to avoid any transportation complications. As Lindbergh made himself comfortable on an available cot, word quickly circulated throughout the unit. Charles Lindbergh was going to fly with Satan's Angels. Pilots responded with a mixture of excitement and skepticism. Lieutenant John Purdy of the 433rd Squadron felt eager to encounter the famed aviator. Some harbored doubts. A few wondered if a well-known 42-year-old civilian could handle contemporary aerial combat. Major Thomas Maguire, already credited with 15 victories and destined to finish the war as America's second top-scoring fighter pilot with 38 confirmed kills, was curious to observe the veteran in action. Early on June 27, 1944, Lindbergh readied himself for his maiden P-38 combat flight. The weather was unfavorable, with continuous rainfall at 0530 hours. By 10:30, as the planes finally departed, the weather had become more suitable. McDonald directed 4 planes to Jeffman Island and Smart Airfield, both routine objectives for the 475th. Lindbergh flew in the Blue 3 position beside Maguire. The remaining plane was flown by Merrill Smith, a veteran with 8 victories. McDonald observed Lindbergh smoothly take position in perfect formation on Maguire's wing. For someone who had only recently trained on the P-38, his performance in formation was impeccable. Their mission required them to strafe an enemy barge in Kaiba's Bay. Lindbergh maneuvered through anti-aircraft fire, firing cannons and machine guns at the target. The operation was a success, allowing all 4 pilots to return unscathed. Yet, what the maintenance crews discovered upon landing proved even more noteworthy than the combat itself. When Lindbergh's P-38 was examined after several sorties, a trend became apparent. His aircraft almost always came back with notably more fuel left compared to other pilots on the same missions. Following a 6.5-hour armed reconnaissance on July 1 to enemy airfields along the western edge of Gilvink Bay, Lindbergh touched down with 210 gallons remaining. Other pilots from that mission landed with fuel tanks nearly empty. On July 3, the unit escorted 16 B-25 bombers for a strike against Jeffman Island. After the bombing, the P-38s searched for enemy barges. Within 60 minutes, 2 aviators reported low fuel levels and turned back. Lindbergh pressed on, his gauges indicating plenty of fuel in reserve. McDonald, noticing the difference, convened a meeting. 48 hours after Lindbergh arrived, the colonel assembled the 475th pilots inside their recreation hall.